Chapter 1. The Market of Forgotten Souls. The desert planet of G-Charanyel stretched out beneath an unforgiving twin sun, its barren, cracked earth baking under the weight of a relentless heat that seemed to sap the very life from anything that dared to exist upon it. This was not a world for the faint-hearted or the privileged. It was a crucible of survival, where only the strongest or the most cunning could scrape by in the shadows of towering, rusted megastructures and sprawling bazaars that rose like ancient colossi from the sands. The planet's capital, a sprawling labyrinth known only as Drezkar, was a testament to both decay and resilience. Its streets were choked with dust and the cries of desperate beings, its marketplaces packed to the brim with the refuse of 1,000 forgotten wars and the hopes of those few who still dared to dream beyond mere existence. In the heart of Drezkar lay the infamous black market, a sprawling, chaotic bazaar where the usual rules of civility and commerce twisted into something far more primal. Here, traders hawked forbidden tech, exotic contraband, and laborers begged for scraps of work, often bartering their very dignity for the chance to earn enough credits to survive another day. The air was thick with the scent of burning fuel, alien spices pungent enough to sear the throat, and the ever-present stench of sweat and desperation. Overhead, the massive shadows of dilapidated starships long grounded and forgotten loomed like relics of a time when this planet was a bustling hub of commerce and war. Now, they served only as reminders of what once was and what had been lost. Amidst this turmoil, weaving her way carefully through the throng of alien species, some towering and insectal, others lithe and scaled, and a few humanoid but marked by strange mutations, was Alara, a Jaran woman whose cobalt blue skin bore the dull sheen of exhaustion and hunger. Her once vibrant markings, symbols of her noble lineage, were barely visible beneath layers of grime and dust. But what caught the eye, more than her weathered face or the worn cloak that barely shielded her from the sun, was the small bundle she cradled protectively against her chest. Within the frayed fabric lay her infant son, barely a month old, his tiny form trembling with weakness yet alive, fragile as a flickering flame amid the storm of suffering that surrounded them. Alara's story was etched deeply into the lines of her face, a tale of loss and endurance that few could fathom. She had been forced to flee her homeworld when civil war erupted, turning cities into battlegrounds and families into refugees. The journey to G-Charanyel had been harrowing, a desperate flight aboard overcrowded freighters and derelict transports, often left to fend for themselves in the void between stars. Upon arrival, there had been no sanctuary, only the grim reality of a planet where hope was a currency as scarce as water. With no family left, no allies to turn to, she had come to the black market, the last place where the desperate could plead for mercy in the form of employment. Her voice, though soft and strained, carried the weight of that desperation. "Please," she whispered to anyone who would listen, "I only ask for work. I have strength in my hands and will to match it. Feed my son, and I will do anything you ask." But the marketplace was a cruel judge, deaf to pleas from those deemed weak or worthless. Her offers were met with cold dismissals, wary glances, and the occasional cruel laugh. The alien crowds moved around her like a tide that rejected the broken and the needy, unwilling to risk their scarce resources on a stranger with no connections or reputation. As the hours dragged on beneath the merciless twin suns, Alara felt the slow creep of despair threatening to crush her spirit. The baby's soft cries were a constant reminder of what was at stake. If she failed, the child would surely perish. Yet, in this ocean of indifference, her gaze caught something unexpected, a human, a rarity in these parts, standing apart, yet watching intently. Jonah was a mechanic by trade, a man whose broad shoulders and sun-beaten skin told tales of hard labor and survival across many worlds. Unlike the others who avoided or ignored her, Jonah's eyes held a spark of recognition, not just of her plight, but of something deeper, an unspoken kinship rooted in shared hardship. Without hesitation, Jonah pushed his way through the crowd, ignoring the suspicious glances and whispered warnings from the aliens who distrusted humans as reckless or dangerous. His voice was steady and kind as he spoke. "If you want work, come with me." The simplicity of those words was a lifeline thrown across the abyss of her despair. Alara felt a surge of hope she hadn't dared to feel in days, perhaps weeks. She nodded, gathering the last shreds of her strength to rise, the baby's weight a comforting burden against her body. The two began walking away from the crushing market, toward the sprawling industrial quarter on the outskirts of the city, a place where Jonah's skills as a mechanic were in demand and where work, while grueling, meant survival. The journey was arduous, the heat oppressive, and the ground littered with debris from forgotten battles and abandoned machines. Yet, the presence of Jonah, a stranger who had offered her a chance without question or condition, was a balm to her weary soul. As they moved, Alara told him fragments of her story, the war that destroyed her world, the harrowing journey across star systems, the endless nights spent shielding her child from hunger and fear. Jonah listened without interruption, his own life marked by losses and battles, though of a different nature. He had seen countless refugees like Alara, but rarely had he met one who carried such fierce determination beneath the weariness. When they arrived at his workshop, a cluttered hangar filled with half-repaired starship parts, ancient engines, and glowing tools, Jonah introduced her to the grueling reality of his trade. There was no glamour here, only dirt, sweat, and the endless grind of making the old new again. But for Alara, it was a lifeline. She threw herself into the work with a zeal born of desperation and hope, learning quickly under Jonah's patient guidance. Days turned into weeks, and the child's health improved alongside Alara's resolve. The pair formed an unlikely partnership, the human mechanic and the alien mother bound by a shared understanding of hardship and survival. In the face of a galaxy indifferent to their plight, they carved out a fragile sanctuary, a testament to the power of compassion and the unexpected bonds that could form even in the harshest environments. Yet, as their small world began to heal, shadows from the past and the ever-present dangers of the black market loomed large, threatening to shatter the fragile hope they had built. The sweat that dripped from Alara's brow as she lifted heavy engine parts and worked alongside Jonah was a testament to the resilience that her spirit refused to relinquish. Every clang of metal, every spark that flew from a welder's torch was a note in the symphony of her rebirth from the ashes of despair. Her hands, once delicate and unused to labor, grew calloused and sure, guided by Jonah's patient instruction and the burning need to secure a future for her child. The workshop, cluttered and noisy, was a sanctuary away from the grinding cruelty of the market, a place where a human and an alien, once strangers from different worlds, found a shared purpose in rebuilding broken machines, and, in some small measure, themselves. Despite the ceaseless hum of machinery and the endless tasks that stretched before her, Alara could not silence the memories that haunted her. Night after night, when the desert wind howled outside and the city lights flickered like distant stars, she would sit by the small cot where her son lay sleeping and wonder if the fragile peace she had found was only temporary. The war on her homeworld had been brutal, tearing families apart and scattering survivors like dust across the cosmos. The faces of those she had lost, her parents, her siblings, visited her in dreams that were more nightmare than refuge. Yet, beneath the weight of grief and exhaustion, there remained a fierce determination, an unyielding promise made in the quiet moments. Her child would not suffer as she had, and she would not fail him. Jonah was not oblivious to the heavy burden Alara carried. Though his own past was cloaked in silence, hinted at only by scars that ran beneath his sleeves and the tired lines etched around his eyes, he recognized the strength it took to keep moving forward when every hope seemed extinguished. He admired her courage, and in return, Alara trusted him not just as a mentor in the art of mechanical repair, but as a rare beacon of kindness in a galaxy too often ruled by greed and cruelty. Their bond deepened quietly, forged in the crucible of shared hardship and mutual respect, even as the harsh world outside continued to threaten their fragile refuge. But the black market was never far from reach. Word spread quickly in the underworld, and those who dealt in flesh and favor saw Alara's growing skill as a threat or an opportunity. Rumors whispered of a human who dared to help an alien refugee, and in a place where suspicion was currency, this attracted attention that neither Jonah nor Alara welcomed. Shadows lengthened as menacing figures lurked on the fringes of the workshop's glow, waiting for a moment to strike or to demand their due. The fragile piece that Alara clung to was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. Chapter 2. A Debt Demanded. The cold steel of the night air settled over Drezkar like a shroud as Jonah and Alara locked up the workshop after another long day of labor. The desert wind whispered secrets through the cracked walls, carrying the distant echoes of alien laughter and the harsh bark of guards patrolling the outer districts. For a moment, the two stood silently beneath the fractured light of the twin moons, the weight of what was to come pressing heavily on their shoulders. The tenuous alliance that had saved Alara from the brink of starvation was about to face a reckoning that would test the limits of their courage and trust. The message came unexpectedly, a coded transmission delivered by an unassuming courier who vanished into the night before Jonah could ask a single question. The words were simple but chilling. The black market's rulers demanded a price for their mercy, and the debt was due. They wanted Alara her skills, her presence, and most importantly, the child she carried not just in her arms but in the fragile hope of a better future. To refuse was to invite ruin. To comply was to risk losing everything she had fought so hard to protect. Jonah's jaw tightened as he read the message, anger and helplessness swirling in his gaze. He knew all too well the brutal realities of the market's underbelly, where debts were paid in blood and loyalty was a fragile commodity bought and sold with violence. But he refused to let fear dictate their fate. "We will not let them take her," he said firmly, his voice steady with resolve. "If they want a debt paid, they'll have to reckon with me first." Alara looked at him. The flicker of hope in her eyes now mingled with fear and determination. She was no longer just a desperate mother. She was a fighter, a survivor whose past had forged her into someone who could endure unimaginable hardship. "I owe them nothing," she whispered, her voice trembling but unbroken. "This child is my future. I will protect him with everything I have." Together, they began to prepare not just to defend the workshop or themselves, but to confront the shadowy forces that had threatened to unravel their fragile sanctuary. They scavenged and repaired old weaponry, fortified the hangar with scavenged materials, and reached out to unlikely allies hidden in the corners of the city. The coming storm was not just a test of strength, but of trust, sacrifice, and the unyielding power of hope in the darkest of places. The nights that followed were a tense ballet of shadows and whispered plans. Jonah and Alara moved cautiously through the labyrinthine backstreets of Drezkar, reaching out to faces both familiar and feared, weaving a fragile web of alliances in a world where trust was a scarce and precious commodity. Among the ragged crowd of outcasts, mercenaries, and former smugglers, they found flickers of sympathy and occasional outright hostility. Yet, Jonah's reputation as a skilled mechanic and a man who never backed down earned grudging respect, while Alara's quiet determination stirred admiration even in the hardest hearts. Together, they became a symbol of defiance against the ruthless order that sought to claim them. Inside the workshop, every clang of metal and hiss of tools was tinged with urgency. Alara, though still learning the intricacies of starship repair and weapon assembly, proved quick and capable, her hands steady despite the burden of exhaustion and fear. Jonah trained her with a focus born of necessity, knowing that the coming confrontation would demand not just courage but skill. The baby's cries, faint but persistent, echoed through the cluttered space, a stark reminder of the stakes at hand. They both knew that failure meant more than personal loss. It meant the end of the fragile hope that had blossomed in the desert's unforgiving soil. As the deadline loomed closer, Jonah and Alara prepared for the inevitable. Their makeshift defenses were bolstered by salvaged energy shields and jury-rigged traps, while old servos and weapon turrets, once dormant relics, were resurrected to stand guard. But beneath the mechanical preparations lay the deeper challenge, confronting the merciless enforcers of the black market's rule, a force as unyielding as the desert itself. The price of defiance was high, and the two knew the coming battle would be won not just for survival, but for dignity, freedom, and the chance to carve out a future against all odds. Chapter 3. The Siege of Hope. The dawn sky bled red over Drezkar, casting long, ominous shadows across the city as the first wave of the black market enforcers descended. They came in groups, hulking brutes clad in scavenged armor, their faces obscured by visors that glinted with cold menace. Their weapons hummed with lethal energy, and their movements were precise, trained to quell dissent and crush rebellion without mercy. The marketplace's usual cacophony was replaced by a tense silence, the air thick with anticipation and fear. Alara stood beside Jonah at the entrance of the workshop, her cobalt skin gleaming faintly beneath the dust, her eyes sharp and unyielding. The baby, wrapped securely against her chest, slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering outside. Jonah's voice was calm but resolute as he issued orders, coordinating their small band of defenders with practiced efficiency. The turrets flared to life, sending pulses of energy streaking into the advancing crowd, while traps exploded in showers of sparks and smoke. The first clash was brutal metal against metal, energy against energy, cries of pain and rage blending with the harsh desert wind. Alara fought alongside Jonah, wielding a salvaged plasma cutter with surprising skill, each strike fueled by the fierce will to protect her child and the fragile sanctuary they had built. The workshop became a fortress of hope, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. Yet, even as they held their ground, Alara knew this was only the beginning. The enforcers would not relent easily, and their leaders, hidden behind layers of power and greed, would send more to crush the defiance that dared to rise on their desolate world. But in the midst of chaos, something unexpected stirred, a sense of unity among the disparate defenders, a growing belief that even in the face of overwhelming odds, survival was possible. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of dawn, Alara's heart beat with fierce determination. They would fight not just for themselves, but for every forgotten soul who dreamed of a better tomorrow. The battle raged relentlessly beneath the blistering sky as waves of enforcers pressed against the workshop's defenses. Each assault was met with a stubborn resistance, a refusal to yield that shocked even the hardened mercenaries who had been sent to enforce the black market's brutal will. Jonah's tactical mind shone through the chaos. He anticipated enemy movements, redirected energy flows to bolster failing shields, and coordinated precise counterattacks that tore through the attackers' ranks. Beside him, Alara fought with a ferocity born of desperation, her every movement a promise to her child that she would not fall today, not while there was breath left in her body. The workshop, once a humble refuge of rusted parts and flickering lights, became a crucible of hope and defiance. Sparks flew as machinery groaned under the strain, while the air thickened with the acrid scent of scorched metal and ozone. But the tide was turning. The enforcers' numbers began to thin, their coordinated strikes faltering in the face of unexpected resistance. The defenders, bolstered by Jonah's ingenuity and Alara's unwavering spirit, found renewed strength in their shared fight. Even some of the cities marginalized, inspired by the unlikely human and alien alliance, joined the fray, lending what weapons and skills they could muster to the desperate cause. Yet, victory was far from assured. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the battered battleground, a new threat emerged, a towering war machine, a relic of forgotten wars, lumbering into the fray with cold, mechanical wrath. Its armor was thick and scarred, its weapons systems capable of laying waste to entire city blocks. The defenders faltered, fear rippling through their ranks. But Alara's eyes hardened with resolve. This was the moment their fight would be truly tested. Rallying the defenders, she and Jonah prepared for a final, desperate stand that would determine not only their fate, but the future of every soul trapped beneath the black market's oppressive shadow. Chapter 4: Dawn of a New Future. The war machine advanced with terrifying inevitability, each step shaking the ground and sending clouds of dust into the fading light. Jonah's heart pounded as he quickly scanned their limited options, realizing that brute force alone would not be enough to overcome such a juggernaut. It was a puzzle to be solved, a test of ingenuity and courage. With a fierce determination born from months of struggle, he directed Alara and their allies to target weak points exposed by years of neglect, to exploit vulnerabilities in the ancient beast's armor. The baby's soft coos from a protected corner reminded them all what they fought for, not just survival, but a chance to build something better. The battle's crescendo was a blur of motion and noise. Explosions tore through the air. Energy weapons lit the dusk with eerie glows, and the ground beneath them trembled with the fury of the conflict. Alara, moving with newfound confidence and strength, coordinated with Jonah in perfect harmony, their combined will pushing back against the relentless force that sought to crush their hopes. Finally, with a decisive strike to a critical joint, the war machine faltered and collapsed in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the ragged breaths of the survivors. As dawn broke over Ji-Charan-Yel, painting the sky with hues of gold and rose, the city awoke to a new reality. The black market's grip was shattered, its enforcers scattered and broken. Word of the human and the alien mother who had defied tyranny spread quickly, inspiring others to rise and reclaim their dignity. Jonah and Alara stood side by side, weary but unbroken, their bond forged in fire and blood. The baby, now safely cradled in Alara's arms, was a symbol of hope, a promise that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, compassion and courage could kindle a brighter future. Together, they began to rebuild not just the battered workshop, but a community that had known only despair. And in that new dawn, they found something more precious than credits or power: the unyielding strength of trust, the enduring light of humanity, and the unbreakable promise to protect the vulnerable, no matter the cost. The first light of dawn spilled softly over the battered skyline of Drezkar, bathing the war-torn streets in a gentle glow that seemed almost unreal after the violence and chaos of the night. The oppressive weight of the black market's iron grip, which had strangled the hopes of countless souls for decades, now lay broken and crumbled like the shattered relics that littered the desert floor. Jonah stood alongside Alara amidst the ruins of the workshop, their bodies weary but their spirits soaring with the quiet exhilaration of hard-won victory. Around them, the few remaining defenders tended to wounds and salvaged whatever tools and weapons they could, their faces etched with exhaustion but lit by the rekindled flame of hope. Alara's gaze softened as she cradled her son close, the tiny heartbeat against her chest a reminder of all that had been lost and all that was now possible. The battles they had fought were not just for survival, but for the chance to reclaim dignity in a world that had long since forgotten kindness. The scars on her skin, the dirt beneath her nails, and the tremble in her muscles told stories of sacrifice and resilience. But they were also testament to the indomitable will that had carried her through. Around her, a growing number of refugees and outcasts began to gather, drawn by whispers of the human and alien who had dared to defy the tyrants, sparking a movement that rippled across the city. Jonah looked out over the gathering crowd and saw in their eyes a reflection of his own belief that the galaxy's harshest deserts could bloom with compassion if only someone was willing to fight for it. He knew the road ahead would be arduous, filled with challenges and uncertainties, but he also understood that this victory, no matter how small in the grand cosmos, was a beacon to those lost in the shadows. Together with Alara, he vowed to transform the workshop from a mere place of repair into a sanctuary for those cast aside, a haven where skills could be rebuilt, hopes restored, and futures forged. News of their triumph spread beyond the borders of Ji-Charan-Yel, reaching distant star systems and igniting conversations about the strength and spirit of a human mechanic and an alien mother who had refused to bow to oppression. Their story became legend, a symbol of how courage and empathy could break the chains of despair and ignite revolutions in the hearts of the oppressed. And for Alara, the promise she had whispered to her son in the darkness that he would know a life filled with more than hunger and fear was no longer just a hope, but a tangible reality beginning to unfold with each passing day. As the twin suns climbed higher, bathing the city in their warm embrace, Alara and Jonah stood side by side, not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as partners united by shared struggle and unwavering resolve. The workshop doors opened wide to welcome all who sought refuge, and the quiet hum of machinery mingled with laughter and life once more. The child in Alara's arms stirred, eyes bright with innocence and promise, a living testament to the idea that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, the smallest sparks could grow into roaring fires that light the way forward. In that new dawn, beneath alien skies and amidst the echoes of a brutal past, a human stepped forward when no one else would, and in doing so, changed the course of many lives forever. The story of Alara and Jonah became a whispered legend throughout the galaxy, a reminder that kindness, courage, and hope were the most powerful forces of all, capable of breaking chains, bridging worlds, and shaping a future where even the most forgotten souls could find their place in the stars. As the dawn's gentle light spilled across the battered landscape of Drezkar, the echoes of battle slowly faded into a heavy silence that seemed almost sacred. The once terrifying rumble of war machines and the harsh cries of enforcers had given way to the quiet murmur of survivors gathering, tending to wounds, and sharing whispered stories of endurance and hope. The city, scarred by years of oppression and recent conflict, began to breathe anew as small pockets of life re-emerged from the shadows. Jonah and Alara stood amidst the ruins of the workshop, their faces streaked with grime and exhaustion, but their eyes shining with a fierce resolve that transcended the fatigue. Alara looked down at her son, now swaddled tightly in clean cloth, his tiny chest rising and falling with steady breaths. The journey they had endured, the battles fought and sacrifices made, all circled back to this fragile life she held so dear. For months, she had clung to the simple, unyielding hope that her child would survive, that somewhere beyond the cruelty of the black market and the harsh desert sun, a better life awaited. Now, as the first true light of freedom touched her skin, that hope felt tangible, almost within reach. Her body ached, her spirit was battered, but the flame inside her burned brighter than ever, a beacon for those who had lost their way in the darkest of times. Jonah moved beside her, hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline and exhaustion. The weight of responsibility sat heavily on his broad shoulders, not just for the woman and child he had come to care for, but for the countless others who now looked to them as symbols of defiance and possibility. He thought back to the first day he had stepped into the market, indifferent to the suffering around him, and marveled at how a single choice to help had sparked a movement. The rusted workshop, once a place of solitary toil and forgotten machines, was now a rallying point for those seeking to reclaim their lives from the merciless grasp of exploitation. They were no longer alone. Together, they were forging something new, something real. Around them, the community began to take shape. Strangers who had once been enemies now shared tools, food, and stories. Children, who had known only hunger and fear, played cautiously in the shadows, their laughter fragile, yet filled with promise. Healers from distant planets offered their skills, mechanics scavenged and rebuilt machines to restore power and hope, and former traders and fighters lent their voices to the chorus of renewal. The city was far from healed, and the threats from those who still wished to reclaim control lingered like distant storms. But the seed of change had been planted, watered by the courage of a human mechanic who had stepped forward when everyone else had turned away. Alara tightened her hold on her son as she watched the sun rise higher, bathing the city in its warm glow. She knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. There would be nights of doubt, moments when the shadows threatened to overwhelm the light. But in this moment, surrounded by the flickering faces of those who had chosen hope over despair, she felt an unshakable certainty. The future was theirs to build. The child in her arms would grow not in a world defined by fear and hunger, but in one where compassion and strength walked hand in hand, where a mother's love and a stranger's kindness could rewrite the stories of forgotten souls. Jonah stepped forward, voice steady but filled with quiet pride as he addressed the gathering crowd. "We have faced the darkness together," he said, "and we have shown that no chain, no threat, no cruelty is stronger than the will to survive and protect those we love. This workshop, this city, this planet, they are no longer places of despair. They are places where new beginnings take root." His words were met with murmurs of agreement, a collective breath of relief, and a surge of determination that filled the air like electricity. And as the twin suns blazed in the sky above, the unlikely family, human, alien, and child, stood as a living testament to the power of one simple act, the courage to step forward when everyone else stepped back. In a galaxy too often defined by conflict and indifference, their story was a beacon of hope, a promise that even the smallest spark of kindness could ignite a blaze that lights the way for all. The hours after the battle were marked not by silence, but by the quiet hum of renewal broken machines began to whir back to life. Once empty bellies were filled with shared meals, and shattered spirits slowly knit themselves together amid the ruins of what had once seemed a lost world. Jonah and Alara worked side by side as dawn gave way to the warm light of morning, their hands steady despite exhaustion, their eyes reflecting a shared determination to build a future worth fighting for. The workshop was no longer simply a place to fix broken starships. It had become a sanctuary, a beacon of hope for the scattered and forgotten, a testament to what could be achieved when compassion overcame indifference. Alara looked down at her son, now asleep in her arms, the faint rise and fall of his chest a rhythm more precious than any machinery or credits. The boy was the living embodiment of the future she had dreamed of, a future born not of privilege or power, but of courage and sacrifice. Every scar etched on her skin, every sleepless night spent fighting for survival, had been worth this moment. It promised that life could thrive even in the harshest deserts of the galaxy. Around her, the faces of those who had stood with them gleamed with quiet pride. They were no longer broken refugees, but architects of a new dawn. Jonah's gaze swept over the bustling crowd, from the scarred warriors tending to their wounds to the hopeful children who played amidst the rubble with newfound laughter. His heart swelled with an unfamiliar warmth, a mix of relief, pride, and the unspoken knowledge that this was only the beginning. The black market's grip had been broken, but the scars of oppression and fear would take time to heal. Yet, within the ruins, a resilient spirit stirred, one that no amount of cruelty could extinguish. Together, they would rebuild not just buildings or machines, but trust and community. Together, they would reclaim their place in a galaxy that had too long forgotten them. As the twin suns reached their zenith, casting golden light across the city, Alara and Jonah stood together before the workshop, their silhouettes framed by the rising hope that now filled the air. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges that would test their strength and resolve. But in that moment, beneath alien skies and amidst the whispers of a new beginning, they knew that the greatest victories were not won by weapons or wealth, but by the courage to stand when others fled, to offer kindness when all seemed lost, and to believe in spite of everything that a better future was possible. Alara smiled softly, pressing a gentle kiss to her son's forehead as Jonah reached out to clasp her hand. "We survived," she whispered, voice trembling with emotion. "Not just for us, but for everyone who still dreams of freedom." Jonah nodded, eyes shining with a quiet promise. "And we will keep fighting together." Their story, born in the dust and desperation of a forgotten market, would ripple across the stars, an enduring testament to the power of humanity, the strength of a mother's love, and the unbreakable bond forged when one human stepped forward, refusing to turn away. In the vast, cold expanse of the galaxy, it was a small light, but sometimes, all it takes is one spark to ignite a revolution.